This is the brand new Insta360 X4 Air, and I've been playing around with it for the past week or so to learn what it's all about. Now, a week isn't a ton of time, but it's enough time to capture some sample footage, compare it to some other 360 action cameras, learn the pros and cons, and learn who it might be for. So in today's video, I'll run through all of the new features and specs of this new camera, what's exciting, what's less exciting, and how it compares to the more expensive Insta360 X5 here. Before we get there though, I should probably mention that this video is not sponsored in any way. However, Insta360 did send the camera out for the purpose of testing, so I could make this video, so do with that information what you will. The X4 Air is a really interesting departure from the typical Insta360 newly released cameras we've seen. Instead of it getting bigger, heavier, with higher resolution and faster and longer lasting battery, it's sort of the opposite of all of those things. This camera's main goal in life is to be affordable and lightweight. That's really the two focuses here. And you might be wondering why they called this the X4 Air and not the X5 Air with the latest generation, and that's because it shares a lot more in common with the Insta360 X4, the standard edition one that came out a couple of years ago. Okay, so if you're new to Insta360 cameras or 360-degree cameras in general, you might be a little bit confused as to what I'm talking about here. 360 action cameras are kind of wild. Essentially, these cameras film everything around you. Instead of you sort of framing your shot with a traditional action camera, you simply hit record, hold it out on a selfie stick, and it records a spherical image of everything around you. And then after the fact, you can take that spherical image video, drop it into the Insta360 app on your phone, and sort of play cameraman after the fact by reframing your shot. That makes these cameras incredibly versatile because you could take a wide angle 16:9 aspect ratio clip from that spherical image, or you can make a vertical video or a square video, or you could use the entire 360 frame for posting to things like YouTube, which not many people do anymore. The point is, with one clip from this camera, you can have multiple outputs. You could do different fields of view, different framing, different vertical or sideways aspect ratios. It's just incredibly versatile. Let's get back to the Insta360 X4 Air though and talk about the pricing here. So this camera is going to start at $399 here in the USA for the standard kit that comes with the camera and a few accessories. Now for $40 more at $439 USD, you can get the starter bundle that will give you the camera, a selfie stick, a lens cap, and an extra battery, which is probably worth getting. If we compare that price at $399 USD to the bigger brother, the X5 here, this camera starts at $549 and goes up from there. So the X5 is about $150 more compared to the X4 Air. And even if we compare the X4 Air to something like the standard X4 that came out a couple of years ago, this camera is still around $430 US, so it's still more expensive than the X4 Air, even though they're very similar. But the main appeal to the X4 Air in the middle here is the size and weight. As you can see, I've got the X4 on the right and the X5 on the left, and even if I get the other cameras here and I stack up all of the previous generations of the X series cameras from Insta360, you can see that the X4 Air is very small. The X4 Air comes in at about 46 millimeters wide, it's about 114 millimeters tall, and it's about 24.5 millimeters thick without the bulging lenses there. And compared to these newer models like the X4 and X5, you can see it is considerably smaller in just about every dimension. They're similar in thickness, though the X4 Air is a little bit thinner, but the overall footprint of the camera is much smaller. But more importantly, the weight is also significantly less with the X4 Air as well. The new Insta360 X4 Air comes in at 165 grams, which is actually the same weight as the new iPhone Air, but that makes this camera the lightest X series camera that dating back all the way to the Insta360 X2 that came out like back in 2020. If you compare the X4 Air here to the X5 weighs 200 grams. And that weight difference is something you notice. Like for example, I do a lot of running and hiking with these types of cameras, and carrying around the X4 Air is a lot easier because of its smaller footprint and its lighter weight. I've noticed sticking it in my running vest or in my pocket, or even just holding it out at an arm's length on a selfie stick is much easier with the X4 Air. Though there are some trade-offs. Now that we've talked size and weight, let's take a closer look at the hardware on this camera. So as you can see, it's a pretty simple device. They've sort of streamlined the design of this camera. On the side, we still get two buttons, one being the power button, one being the quick preset button here. On the front here, we only get a single button, where on previous models like the X5, there's 2 buttons on the front, but that single button is a dedicated record button. On the bottom of the camera, we do have a 1/4-20 thread for mounting to a selfie stick, but we also have Insta360's excellent magnetic quick release adapter there as well, so you can pop this onto multiple different accessories. Back on the front of the camera here, we do have a large display to see what's going on. You can, of course, scroll your finger around and get a view of your surroundings on this display because it is a 360 camera, and it has a very similar user interface to all previous Insta360 cameras, where you can set your resolutions, you can go through multiple different modes. For example, we have video mode, we have Instaframe mode, which will record a standard video and 360 video. We have time-lapse mode, we have time shift, we have loop recording, we have road mode to use as a car camera, star lapse mode, burst mode, interval mode, photo mode, and back to video mode. And of course, we can also drop into single lens mode and use the camera as a more traditional action camera by utilizing only a single lens instead of both lenses. And of course, we can scroll down from the top of the page here and access our settings and different gesture modes and things like that, but I'm not gonna dive too deep in all that because again, it's very similar to previous Insta360 cameras. Moving up to the lens here, you're gonna notice another difference on the X4 Air that shares a lot of similarities with the X5 here, and it's that this lens is removable and replaceable. In terms of durability, this camera feels like it's made quite well. It feels pretty robust. It's all plastic, but it feels like a very high quality device, and it's still water resistant to 15 meters. Flipping over to the other side of the camera here, we have access to the battery, which looks very similar to the X5, though it is different because this is a smaller battery. The Insta360 X4 Air uses a 2010 milliamp hour battery. That's the one you're seeing here on the right side of the screen, while the X5 on the left side of the screen uses a 2400 milliamp hour battery. There's some good news and bad news here when it comes to the battery. So first of all, in terms of battery life, the new X4 Air can run up to 88 minutes in its highest resolution setting of 8K at 30 frames per second. And that's actually not too far off from the X5 here, which can run up to 100 minutes in endurance mode in 8K 30 frames per second. Now, the battery life will vary depending on what mode and frame rate you're in. You're definitely going to get less out of the X4 Air, but not by a huge margin. The bigger downside to the difference in battery here is the physical size. So as you can see, the X5 has a physically larger battery. And because of that, if you have a bunch of these batteries kicking around, they will not work in the X4 Air simply because they don't fit. Now, on the topic of battery life, we have to talk about overheating. I was actually worried about the X4 Air because it's a smaller form factor camera, and I thought because it doesn't have any active ventilation or vents or anything on it, it would be prone to overheating. I'm happy to report in my testing so far, this camera does not overheat. I let it sit on a shelf behind me and run for an hour continuously. It did not overheat. Maybe it will in some situations, but it seems like it's pretty solid in that regard. Now that we've talked battery life, let's talk about video modes on the X4 Air, because this is another area where you do make some compromises. So if I dive into the video settings here, you can see that I have 8K 30 frames per second. If I go to 6K, I can go up to 50 frames per second. And if I go to 4K, again, I can get up to 50 frames per second. Now, if you go over to the X5 here, this camera supports up to 120 frames per second in 4K, and it can go all the way to 60 frames per second in 5.7K. So the X4 Air is pretty much not capable of doing anything super slow motion. Even at 50 frames per second in 6K, that's not native 2x slow motion if you're filming on a timeline that's 30 frames per second. So you're not gonna achieve any like dramatic slow motion footage with this camera. Now, personally, the slow motion thing doesn't bother me so much because I don't often utilize slow motion in my videos. However, if you're doing something like high action, or you're on a mountain bike, or you're doing a jump on a dirt bike or something like that, that's where you might want that 120 frames per second of the X5. Jumping back to the resolution though, 8K at 30 frames per second. And some of you might be thinking, wow, 8K, that must be super high resolution. And it is, but it's not true 8K. So the way these cameras work is they're stitching together two images, one from the back lens, one from the front lens, and combined, they are creating an 8K spherical image. However, after you take that 8K image and drop it into the app and then reframe frame your shot and then export it into like a 16:9 or vertical video for Instagram or something, you're not going to be getting 8K. You're going to be getting something less than that, likely closer to like 4K or even lower than 4K. So what does that mean for image quality? Well, image quality is where it gets kind of interesting with this camera. You see, the new Insta360 X4 Air actually has larger imaging sensors compared to the standard X4. The X4 Air uses a 1/1.8-inch imaging sensor compared to the half-inch imaging sensor from the X4. However, compared to the X5, the X4 and the X4 Air do have smaller imaging sensors, so the X5 has an advantage in a few departments, like in low light situations. We'll talk about that in a minute. Side by side though, you do notice slightly more detail in the X5 footage, and it does have slightly better dynamic range as well, where you can see the shadows and highlights a little bit more clearly. Compared to the GoPro Max 2 though, I have been surprised how well the X4 Air holds up. The GoPro certainly has more natural looking colors, but the resolution and sharpness on the X4 Air is right in line with the GoPro, and side by side they both look pretty good. Generally speaking, unless you're comparing these cameras side by side, I don't think you'll be disappointed with the image quality coming out of the X4 Air. It's really good, and just like all Insta360 action cameras, the stabilization on this camera is completely mind-blowing. Because you're recording a 360 video image, you're able to crop in and stabilize it in the app, and it looks like it's floating like a drone is following you around. It's super smooth, super seamless, and stabilization is not a concern with this camera. It's very good. Even though the image quality is quite good from the X4 Air, it still has a downside, and that is the low light capability of this camera. It's not all bad news, but it's certainly not as good as the X5 here. So if you're unaware, the Insta360 X5 has a couple of things going for it. First of all, it has an additional AI chip inside of it that's dedicated for that low light capability in the form of something they call pure video mode. And pure video mode is a dedicated mode on the camera for use in dark environments. And on top of that, like I said before, it also has larger imaging sensors under the lenses, which can capture more light and makes it easier to see what's going on in dark situations. The X4 Air, on the other hand, if you're in a dimmer situation like it's dusk or the sun's going down, you're still going to get a usable image. But if you are in like a super dark environment where it's only like street lights, or you're in the dark and there's a single point of light, you're not going to get anything remotely as good as the X5 here. Now that we've talked video quality, what about audio quality coming from the microphones built into this camera? Well, just like on the Insta360 X5 here, I believe the X4 has a similar microphone array. You can see on the front, there's this sort of speaker grill on both cameras, and underneath there is one of the microphones, and that speaker grill is designed to reduce wind noise if you're in a windy environment. Today we're out on my local trails nearby, do a little 5, maybe 10-mile loop, see what's in the gas tanks today. I'm a little bit tired. My watch is beeping at me, and I thought this would be a good test of the audio quality from the built-in microphones on the Insta360 X4 Air. Tell you what, it's a lot easier to carry this thing around when I'm doing runs like this, where the X5, it's compact, but it's kind of heavy. Right now, the X4 Air on this selfie stick is really nice and lightweight. I'm not fatigued holding it. In my opinion, the microphones on this camera actually sound quite good, especially for dialogue, for things like vlogging. If you're just walking around and talking to the camera has a way of sort of zoning in on your voice to a point where it sounds surprisingly good, even in a somewhat windy environment. But of course, when it comes to the audio quality, I'll leave that up to you, since you can hear it with your own ears. That brings us to the end of the video, where I want to talk final thoughts on this new Insta360 X4 Air. Where does that leave us with this new camera? The Insta360 X4 Air is a solid little camera in my opinion, and I think it's marketed towards both people who are new to action cameras, like beginners, because it's a very simple and easy to use camera with a really nice and polished app after the fact. The Insta360 app for editing has come a long way, and it's super easy to use. But on top of that, I think it's also designed for people who might value the smaller and lighter weight of this camera, because if you have an Insta360 X5, you know it's compact, but it is kind of bulky if you're into things like running or hiking or climbing and things like that, where you want to have one of these cameras, but they're sort of hard to find a spot for. The X4 Air's footprint is smaller, but more importantly, that lightweight nature to it just has me drawn to it, and it seems like something I'll be reaching for more and more often when I'm out on my next trail running adventure. And when it comes to the price, at $399, that's certainly not inexpensive, but if you look around at high-end 360 action cameras, you're gonna notice that these cameras are typically up in that $500 price range. But you do have to keep in mind the 3 factors that might be a deal breaker for you. Obviously, less battery life on this camera, it's not as good in low light situations, and the lack of high frame rates for slow motion footage. If any of those things are super important to you, then you probably want to look elsewhere. For people who just want to capture casual footage and not do slow motion, you're not filming in the dark, you really value the size and weight of the camera, this is certainly worth taking a look at. But that's just my opinion, and I'm just some guy on YouTube rambling in a room by myself. Now's the point of the video where I want to hear from you in the comments down below. What do you think of the new Insta360 X4? Is it worth running out and grabbing? Is it worth $400 in your opinion? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And as always, after you're done commenting, check out the video description down below where I will have all of the cameras I talked about in this video listed. Those are affiliate links. They do help support this channel, but they cost nothing extra to you, so you might as well use them, even if you're buying a GoPro or something entirely different. And after you check out the links, also make sure to drop down and hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel down below if you found some value in this video, because that really helps me out. And I think that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.